what really happened to 26-year-old Mary Habila? That is the question gripping Nigerians right now. As controversy swirls around the tragic death of the physiotherapist who passed away at the country home of the Minister of Works, Senator Dave Umahi in Uburu, Ebonyi State. According to sworn court statements, Mary was found unconscious in her room on June 27th and was pronounced dead on arrival at the hospital. While public anger and suspicions of foul play intensify, a dramatic twist has emerged. The father of the deceased, Mr. Tanko Habila Wisdom, has sworn to a formal affidavit, an affidavit of withdrawal of case. In it, he deposes that his family will not accept an autopsy, that they do not suspect any foul play, and that they will not honor any further police or court invitations. But tonight, as the family demands her corpse for burial, we must ask, can a private affidavit shut down a criminal investigation? What does the law actually say? Now, a quick disclaimer. I am not a lawyer, but my personal inquiries and legal research into this case have revealed a clear and uncompromising truth. The will of a private family cannot override the statutory duty of the state to find the truth. First, let us look at the Nigerian Police Act. Under Section 4 of the Police Act, the Nigerian Police Force has a mandatory, non-delegable duty to detect and investigate crime when a death occurs in sudden, unnatural, or unsuspicious circumstances. A crime is suspected against the state, not just a private family. Thus, a crime cannot be compromised or withdrawn by an affidavit. Second, and most critical, is the Coroners System Law. In Ebonyi State, this law is captured under the Coroners Law of Ebonyi State, which empowers every sitting magistrate in the district to act as a coroner. Under that law, whenever a coroner has a reason to suspect that a person died an unnatural, violent, or sudden death of unknown cause, the coroner must hold an inquest. This statutory power gives the state the exclusive jurisdiction to direct a medical examiner to perform a post-mortem examination. This legal order completely overrides the parents' objections. The law says the truth belongs to the public, and no private oath can bury a potential crime. Why does the state have this duty in the first place? Because the first and most sacred responsibility of any government is the preservation of human life and the defense of the vulnerable. When a citizen dies in suspicious circumstances, the state becomes the voice of the deceased. The state has a moral and constitutional contract to find out why, regardless of pressure, convenience, or influence. What happens if the state ignores this duty? What happens if the authorities comply with this affidavit and simply walk away? It sets a dangerous, frightening precedent. It means that in Nigeria, a sudden death can be swept under the rug. If the right papers are signed, it opens the door for coercion, where powerful individuals can pressurize grieving, vulnerable families into silence. If the state walks away, it signals to the public that justice is negotiable, that suspicious deaths can be settled in chambers, and that the lives of ordinary citizens do not warrant the supremacy of the law. So, what happens next? If the Ebonyi State Police Command or the Attorney General of Ebonyi State choose to act in the interest of public justice, they can bind the hospital not to release the body, compare the autopsy, and bind the witnesses to testify. The sworn affidavit of withdrawal is a statement of family wishes, but it is not a shield against the law. In the quest for truth, the law remains supreme. I am just a private citizen, only interested in what happens around this case, and most importantly, for truth and justice.